we go. David, hi, good to see you this afternoon.
Hi, good to see you.
Now, we obviously face quite big challenges as we come forward now, and actually, I think you're probably right in the middle of it because the supply chain is going to be a crucial piece. And I think it often doesn't get enough recognition of probably what it's going through at this point in time. I mean, how do you see the supply? Let's start with a broad question. How do you see the supply chain changing over the next few years?
Well, I think the big driver at the moment is cash. And most businesses in our sector, whether they're an operator or whether they are a supplier, have got vastly, generally speaking anyway, have got vastly weakened balance sheets, and therefore they've got much less cash. And that, you know, to the naked eye might seem like it's not going to have very much impact, but we think it will. I've certainly seen that happen. This is my fourth recession in 40 years. It's probably going to be the biggest one, and it's certainly been happening in previous recessions where there's been a fair amount of consolidation in the supply market, and I think we'll see that this time as well. And of course, the other issues are around security of supply, particularly as this isn't just about the pandemic, it's about the recession and also about Brexit, frankly. You know, let's not forget that's only a few months away now, the deal or no deal. So I think there are a range of issues, particularly around consolidation, fewer suppliers, probably reduced diversity of supply. I think, you know, standard ingredients are going to be what suppliers want to sell, and they won't want to sell the fiddly stuff because it's high cost to serve. And that's going to mean that the price of those items will go up, and standard items will probably remain fairly similar to where they are now. And drop size, you know, so the size of a delivery is going to be a big issue for the sector, because, you know, if you're running at 40% or 50% of volumes, and you still keep the same delivery profiles as you had before 2019, then, you know, it's going to force your price up. So there's a whole raft of things in there. And the final point I'd make to that question is it's a real kissing frogs world now. And what I mean by that is that there are lots of people in offices, or actually at home, like I am at the moment, raking over balance sheets, either of customers or suppliers, trying to work out who are the ones that are going to survive. And that has its own end results, as you can imagine. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting and tough time.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot then as we do that one. Your forecasts in this, in terms of how the markets are going to change?
What, in number terms, or
well, any way you want, because it's one of those hard ones. I mean, the food service sector is going to be badly impacted, isn't it? Because as we've discussed many times, it's the numbers of people return to offices is going to fall dramatically.
Well, I think probably the way I would phrase it is that there are a number of suppliers in the market who are large enough and have deep enough pockets to survive comfortably through what is going to be a very, very lean couple of years. Those suppliers, there's maybe 3 or 4 of them, are probably going to use payment terms as a major negotiation tool, because if they've got the deep enough pockets to take the risks, then they'll extend payment terms. For people that are not in a good, strong position themselves, they'll really struggle to get good terms of supply from anybody else other than them. So I think it's going to force more consolidation. We're probably going to end up with a dramatic reduction in regional and local supply for a while, which will actually change it significantly. And it's probably going to be 2 to 3 years before that washes out. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's...
Well, it does. I mean, you can see straight away there's a contradiction, because the argument at the moment is, of course, most people are going towards local supply. There's a greater desire at the moment for local supply, but that's going to be the bit that's most under most pressure.
Well, I think it's, that's a really good point you make, Chris, because I think that what the lockdown created was this situation where lots of food service suppliers suddenly had no customers and were switching from B2C from business to business to B2C. As a result, you have got a lot more, as a single consumer, you have a lot more access to local supply than perhaps we've ever had, actually. You know, I myself have a friend who runs a farm in Shropshire who sends me stuff in the post. You know, and we've even seen, you know, quite amazingly, we've seen, this is national, but it's very interesting how that whole market is changing. We've seen Pizza Pilgrims, for example, do pizza in a box, which is a pizza cooked in a frying pan. And it's phenomenal. It's a really good product. So I think that, you know, the market is shifting, but I think the problem for anything more than a single restaurant or a single small hotel is that buying locally may just be too challenging to do. And then actually to get the kind of consistency of supply and the level of credit terms that, you know, because cash is going to be king, I think it will push people towards the larger and, shall I say, richer suppliers.
So the obvious question in terms of yourself, what's going to be the role of procurement management over the next few years as well?
Well, that's another really good question. I think that procurement has, and this is something I feel quite strongly about, procurement has in the boardrooms of the sector for 20 years been seen as being a fairly one-dimensional, excuse me, I live in Birmingham, you probably just heard somebody go past. It is a fairly is often a very one-dimensional discipline. You know, the board of a business often thinks of procurement as the guys that keep the cost down. And of course, that is what they do. You know, procurement is about driving costs, but it's not just about that. And you know, you only have to look at situations like happened in 2018 with KFC to see that actually major supply chain failure can happen really easily. And in this environment, the risk of major supply chain failure increases. So not only is risk important, but security of supply, because particularly with Brexit coming downstream, there's going to need to be some work done by most organisations on where product comes from, you know, onshoring product potentially from Europe into the UK. And also there's a forest of literally thousands of small SME manufacturers who sit above the wholesalers that supply our sector. And many of them are going to go to the wall in the next year, 18 months. So you might be an Italian restaurant chain buying a tomato sauce for your pasta and suddenly find there's no manufacturer. So there's a whole kind of ton of stuff in there, and that needs to, you know, procurement needs to grab that stuff because the business costs of that going wrong are often more than 1 or 2 percentage points on price.
I mean, it's an interesting conflict, isn't it? Which that's the reason why I said at the beginning, you're right in the heart of it, because people want to see a broader outlook by business, to be more community aware, more socially aware. But at the same time, by everything you're saying, it's almost the pressures are going to be on the opposite. And actually procurement's going to have to find a way through both. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's a really fair comment. And I think how I would articulate that is particularly around the sustainability challenges that we face, because you know we are in a situation where there are apparently conflicting objectives. You know, on the one hand, we have to drive shareholder value, keep our customers happy, keep our employees happy, maintain a good supply chain, create a healthy, sustainable sector, because we need that. It's essential. But at the same time, we've got to kind of resolve the issues that that exist in terms of food and drink, particularly, and its effect upon climate, diet and health, and restoring the natural environment, which has been wrecked, frankly.
And I know you're a passionate supporter of how we rebuild that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we had this conversation a few days ago. Will sustainability take a backward step at this point, or do you think it's actually going to be a catalyst for more better change?
I'm an optimist on this, and I'm an optimist not because it's not a huge challenge, because it is. Because just looking at procurement organisations in particular, the amount of bandwidth that's available at the moment is really narrow. So it's really tough to imagine dealing with both of those. And what people are going to have to do is try to come up with solutions that hit both objectives. And I think we need to. We are in the process of reinventing our food and drink system. If you go back to when I was born in the 1950s. We were emerging from post-World War world, post-Second World War. And the focus of the food system at the time globally was about feeding the planet. Because there was a massive surge in population, and farmers and agronomists, or what they're called, economics guys who do agriculture, were saying, we're going to run out of food. By the late 60s, early 70s, we won't have enough food to feed everybody. And so as a result, a whole load of effort went into technology and automation, distribution of food. And there was some pretty revolutionary stuff that happened in farming to increase yields at that time. But the problem is that was so successful, particularly all the way through the 70s, 80s, 90s, that we now, as a planet, we have enough food to feed ourselves generally. I mean, if there are problems with hunger and starvation, it's usually political or distribution that causes the problem. It's not that we can't grow the food. But the problem is that calories and fats have become so abundant and so cheap that we're making ourselves sick, particularly through the use of processed foods. And we've also massively destabilized the environment. We've polluted the planet with plastics, and we've got rising carbon levels that have now reached a dangerous level. So those things have got to be addressed, and I think they will be addressed by mostly actually through technology, in the way that technology was at the heart of changing the food system after the war. So technology will do it again now, and things like vertical farming, lab-grown meat replacements, lots more data management around the food system, on-farm automation, all of those things, together with a general feeling that certainly in this country, in farming, which is that the use of fertilizers and pesticides and so on is not good for the environment, causes untold damage. So I think there is a mood swing in many parts of the world, not in some, but in many, to move that way. So I think we will get there.
Well, look, I'm a positive too, and actually part of that is because I think there's two narratives that go on. I think there's our age group, which still does follow the same old tram lines a bit that it always has done. Yeah. And hasn't really changed. And yet the young generation, the millennials, I do think have a desire for change and will create that momentum for change, a greater momentum all the time. And I think as they're getting into their 40s, they're getting to positions of influence. So it's going to get more natural too.
Well, I think the other thing is that, because I think there is a huge positive, which is that technology in terms of data management and transparency of supply chains is now starting to take leaps forward, and you're starting to see the vision. It's not there yet in reality, but you start to see the vision of how you can really control provenance and standards all the way through a food supply chain. And I mean, it's amazing. There's been a report this week about illegal farming in deforested land in Brazil, and JBS, a major meat company, having bought beef out of this supply chain, And on the one hand, you look at it and you go, wow, that's awful, it's terrible. But actually, compared with 10 years ago, that was just happening everywhere. Nobody knew about it. There wasn't any data, there wasn't any information. Everybody just knew it was going on but couldn't tap it. So I do think, you know, what gets measured gets done. And if we get the data into our supply chains that we need, it'll make a major difference to our ability to control sustainability, because we'll be able to, consumers will instruct us to buy to certain standards and they'll want evidence of it.
Okay, fair play. Let's talk a bit about you, shall we? So what got you into procurement in the first place?
Well, actually, I was an operator. I was working for a hotel company. I worked for Crest Hotels and then THF and then Forte. And in one of the very nasty recessions, I think it was the Gulf War one, my boss said, we're going to have to lose loads of people at your level in the organization. But you know, we think you're a nice man. You seem to smile a lot, and we think we should try and keep you. So he said, we found you a role in procurement, and I rather unenthusiastically said, can't I stay in operations, because that's just not really my thing. Buying, but like a fool, he said, well, look, he said a really good thing. He said, yeah, we'll do it for a year, and then we'll move you back into operations. So like a fool, I walked around saying, well, I'm only doing it for a year. It's just a secondment. And here I am, getting on 25 years later, and I love it more than anything else. So that's how I got into it. And
why did you fall in love with it? What made you fall in love?
The diversity of different marketplaces and how they operate, the diversity of multinational, multi-continent, and also the kind of intellectual challenge of understanding so many different marketplaces. I mean, I was like a pig in poo. You know, I was really happy, and still am actually now, because I think it's such an interesting world, and it's also such a diverse world. You know, you can be talking about importing beef from Brazil one minute, and the next minute you're talking about electricity production coming from Europe into the UK. You know, so it can be very, very diverse. Love it.
Obviously, you set up Prestige, I'm going to say 21 years ago, 22 years ago.
Yeah, 1998, 1st of January.
That's the same time as we did, actually. Ironically. There we go. I didn't realize that. There we go.
We should have a party in 25 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Not 22 years, anyway. And why? How did that come about? And what is Prestige, to those who don't know, who listen to this?
It came about because I won't, to protect the innocent, I won't name names, but I found myself working in an organization where it was purely an asset play. It was all about ripping the cash out of it. And you can't do procurement in a short-term world well. And I became very unhappy, and actually somebody just phoned me up one day and said, would you like to buy a purchasing company? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. Can I come and have a look at it? And actually thinking I would never buy it. But when I went and saw it and saw the opportunity, I kind of gave up all the corporate trappings and bought this tiny little business, which we've now made into a slightly less tiny little business over 20 odd years. But it's been a very enjoyable journey. What we do is what we say on the tin is we deliver lasting margin improvement through best-in-class supply chain management. That's kind of what we do. But I think probably what is more interesting is that the purchasing market. You see lots of companies around with purchasing or procurement in their names, and most of them are about buying power. You know, they try to put volume together of lots of clients and go to suppliers and negotiate a better price as a result of it. And we do that, but it's not all we do. What we try and do is apply really high quality professional expertise and some of the best, largest and deepest data in the marketplace to help deliver a really professional outcome, not just a cheaper price. So, and why we do it really is because I think, you know, now is a really interesting moment for our business, because procurement is, as I was saying, is very diverse and very complicated. It's multifaceted and requires lots and lots of different product skills, lots and lots of different personal skills and attributes. So it's quite difficult for relatively small businesses who can't afford an army of procurement people to really do the job well. So what we really do is provide knowledge and flexibility on delivery for organizations that can't create the bandwidth to do it all themselves. Essentially what we're trying to do is do two things. One is create sufficient simplicity inside an organization to ensure that when they decide what they want to buy, it's quite lean. You know, it's nice and simple. The supply chains are straightforward and not full of complexity. And then we help organizations manage their markets better. And actually that's the interest, that's what the data is there for, because often people are 5, 6, 7 percentage points away from market pricing, just on that alone, let alone the lean stuff.
And actually, look, surely procurement's going to be right in the heart of the battlefield as we come out of this. So this must be an opportunity for real change in the sector.
Thank you. I'm going to. I think, of course, I think that's right. For me, the simple reason why that's right. If you take a restaurant group, say, with a £10 million revenues, it wouldn't be unusual for them to be making something like 6% EBITDA, so £600,000 profit. If they apply really good supply chain management into their gross profit and improve their gross profit by 3 percentage points of turnover, which is not unusual for for really good procurement making that much difference, that adds 50% to their EBITDA. Now, if you compare that, you say, well, okay, let's stay at 6%. How much more sales do we need to do to make that 900,000? You have to grow your sales by 50%, which is why if you talk to management gurus, gross profit is the most important lever in any business. You know, and really focusing on gross profit can transform your profitability, which is why we do what we do.
No, I understand that completely. But it's more than that, isn't it? I mean, the challenge coming up at the moment is so tough, isn't it, for companies? I mean, you're going to have customer falling. Everyone's going to be renegotiating rent rates or whatever their deals are. Contracts all over the place. And actually, people are going to still expect, customer who does come is going to expect a high quality produce, and probably even higher quality produce. So, I mean, for the operator, they're going to have to get the product right, because if you don't have the product, it's going to get even worse.
It's critical, and I find it fascinating. You look at the manufacturing world. You know, I have a lot of contact with food manufacturers, being in the world I'm in, and their obsession with both food price and food quality, or ingredient price and ingredient quality, is laser-like. I mean, they manage the life out of it. And I think that purchasing's time is now in that sense. I do think supply chain, people cannot afford to carry the inefficiency either through lack of availability of product or maybe paying 5% more than they should do for a product. Particularly the stuff like drop size we were talking about a minute ago. I know there are operators out there who are just saying, oh, well, I expect my suppliers to continue to do 7 deliveries a week. And we say, well, that might not be the wisest decision. So often these things are not about just going out and trying to get a price. It's about understanding the impact that you as an operator have upon your suppliers and collaborating with them. And I think that is another interesting point for me, because I think there are some changes needed in procurement in our sector. And the first one I kind of alluded to earlier, which is around governance. I think boardrooms need to increase their level of consciousness about what procurement and supply chain does, because particularly in this environment, it is not going to be about cost. It's going to be about risk and cash, credit terms, payments, risk of failure. All those things are going to be important. But secondly, in order to kind of deliver the sustainability challenges that are required, we need procurement people who are much more far-sighted than many are in our sector at the moment. Ones that are capable and have the personal skills to collaborate broadly in a whole value chain, not just with the wholesaler to negotiate the cheapest price. And then I think the other thing is we need procurement people who are interested and passionate about technology, particularly around improving transparency in their supply chains. And again, there's I feel a frustration because there's just not enough urgency around those things yet for us to make the kind of transformations that we need to do over the next couple of years.
So your overall outlook is positive for yourselves?
Yeah, well, I mean, for my business, I'm really excited, because I think that in spite of the terrible pain that we see around us, I think we've got real value that we can add to the sector. And we're already having lots of discussions with lots of operators about how we can help keep them focused on doing what they need to do best around their supply chain. So I'm very excited about that. The sector is, as a whole, our customer base is particularly in the dining sector, I think is probably the one most vulnerable, and hotels too, actually. And of course, let's not forget, my son works one of my sons works in the meetings and events sector, and that's dead on its feet completely. So I do think we're going to see a lot of pain. If you're running, I know of a conference venue business that's got 50 odd sites. I mean, if you're the CEO of that business, what do you do right now? Yeah, it's just so we are in a very difficult place. But you like me, Chris, have been through one or two recessions before. We always emerge from them. And I think people shouldn't be, of course, bad things can happen, but people shouldn't be scared. What they should be doing is focusing on ensuring that the things that the things that one can control oneself in one's own business, in one's own life, are the things to worry about. And all the stuff you can't control, you just have to say, well, whatever comes from that comes from that. And it's tough, but I think that's life's lesson, really.
David, I have to say thank you. We've run out of time, but that's been lovely talking to you. So I thank you very much for your time.
Cheers.